ago. So that's something I would encourage. Talk to your colleagues, get involved, expand your trusted network, and include people who are not like you, that don't have the exact same thoughts that you do, because they're the ones who will really wake you up to how you should be acting and what you can change to move forward.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the peopleHum interview series. I'm Aishwarya Jain from the peopleHum team. peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM, that's specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and channel that receives more than 400,000 visitors a year, and we also publish several interviews with well-known names globally every month. And now for our guest, today we have with us Denise Reed Lamoreaux. Denise is the Global Chief Diversity Officer at Atos and brings 30 plus years of leadership, marketing and communication and learning and development experience to her role. She is aligned with recruiting, corporate social responsibility, the compliance network, and learning and development to ensure that the diversity dimensions are interwoven into business processes and that learning opportunities focus on diversity and inclusion topics. So, welcome, Denise. It's really a pleasure to have you with us here.
Thanks. I'm really thrilled and honored that you asked to speak with me. Looking forward to this.
Me too, absolutely. So Denise, I'd love to kind of begin by understanding a little bit about your passion towards, a topic that is kind of so different from what, normally somebody would go into as a career, which is more about diversity, inclusion. And how does it really align to, what you're doing with Atos?
Sure, I'd be happy to share some information in that space. So I began my career in secondary education. I went to college to become a teacher, and I taught high school English and history. And then I stayed home for a few years with my children when they were small. And when it was time to go back to the workforce, that's when corporate training was becoming a career path. So I parlayed my transferable skills into working in the corporate training field. Spent many years working in that area, as well as a stint in marketing and communications, which helps sharpen my writing and editing skills and so forth. I moved into a leadership position where I was leading a global cadre of trainers and was very happy doing that type of work. And then I was affected by a downsizing in 2015. At that time, I was able, luckily, to be employed by Atos, came into the company first as a global program manager, and then moved into a training role. And then very quickly, I was able to step into creating the diversity and inclusion role for North America initially. That was, in response to the fact that I had been very active as a volunteer in diversity and inclusion work in my previous company. So once I stepped into this role, it was up to me to start, benchmarking and looking what other companies were doing, incorporating what I knew worked already, and building something that had momentum, it had impact, and it was able to be scaled. Within just a few months of being in the North America role, it became apparent that we would also want to roll this type of work into a global position. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. Love my job, love the challenge of it. Every day is very different from the one previous to it. And there's so much to cover in this space. So as you mentioned in my intro, I align with all the different organizations that make up this company. And we do have a very active employee engagement program, which is called We Are Atos. So as part of, my offerings, I partner with the We Are Atos team several times a year to make sure that during the We Are Atos Employee Week, there are focuses on diversity and inclusion topics. And I readily share what's on our calendar with those people who are engaged more frequently in the We Are Atos program. So we mesh together, but we also have our own kind of focuses that really help blend out that overarching culture of inclusivity that we are promoting here at the company.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's wonderful what you're doing, the work you're doing, and with your experience, I'm sure a lot of lives are actually getting impacted for the better, which is kind of truly a noble deed. And I think through the different times that we've been, I think the one that we are in is truly unique, um, and on that note, I wanted to ask you, the virus that we have here right now, the pandemic situation, that does not really discriminate, but there are certain groups, certain minorities that you'd agree are more severely impacted by it than others. So I wanted to ask you, which groups do you see that are at a social and economic disadvantage, and what do you think are the reasons behind it?
It's funny that you should ask that question because I literally just posted within the last couple of hours a new course I created and recorded called Worried, Weary, and Worn Out: The Impact of COVID-19 on Our Employees. And I really got into sharing some of the demographic information about how this pandemic has made such an impact on all of the different types of employees that exist in today's world. And the fact that they're increasingly worried about lost revenue, furloughs and layoffs, and very much worried too from the physical perspective of any lasting effects of having had the virus. And the knowledge that out of every 100 people, 2 people may end up with some form of a permanent partial disability. But in the populations that we take a look at from our diversity and inclusion programs, people in the LGBT plus community are concerned about catching the virus because of their health and because they may have vulnerable partners and friends. But they are also the population that is impacted by isolation a little bit differently than other populations. If you are a member of the LGBT plus community and are over the age of 50, there are chances that you are not in a long-term permanent relationship. And during your coming out phase, it may have actually alienated you from your family. So the social isolation aspect can be very tough on people's psyche as they go into, like, what is this, the 8th month now of us being in the pandemic situation. LGBT youth also experience issues with social isolation, and to the point where they may have food insecurities because they have been asked to leave their homes when they have announced their sexual orientation and preferences, and find themselves at a point in time in history where it's very difficult to secure a job. Latinx individuals and people of Black or African American descent are worried about being able to, pay all their bills and so forth in case of an actual pandemic layoff. And with no commute, people are working more and more hours. Employees spent over 22 million extra hours on their primary job each workday over the last 6 months. And women in tech are 1.5 times more likely to be laid off than men, and 1.5 times more likely to feel that they are the ones with the responsibility for childcare within the home. So we find that our managers really need to be aware of this current reality. And as they're interacting with their employees and need to provide feedback to them on performance, to keep some of these underlying factors in mind and have a much more respectful, thoughtful, and empathetic conversation than they may have had, say, a year ago at this time.
Wow, those are amazing statistics and some really great insights that I think a lot of organizations would actually benefit from. And truly, the I think the disparity is something that everyone must actually get concerned with, because at the end of it, it's everybody's moral duty to take care of people around them. So I think thanks a lot, Denise, for those amazing insights. It's truly an eye opener.
It really is.
I agree. And also, when we talk about new age things, new age, and I'm talking to I kind of talk to Deborah Rue a lot, and also Neil Milliken from Atos. And Deborah is a sweetheart, and there are a lot of these personalities that you find in a workplace, and there are generations, different generations that kind of come together in that ecosystem of a workplace. Now, while some relationships really, kind of bond, we do see a lot of generational gaps, especially in cultures that are kind of disconnected, and there is a lot of communication gap between them. So, how do you think that should be addressed, and what is your kind of experience about this whole topic?
This is a huge area of passion for me. It's the first time in the history of the working world where there are 5 generations in one office building all at the same time. And with that comes a whole different set of definitions for how work gets done, what quality means, what a leader should be doing with and for their teams, and how teams themselves should function and interact. And without paying attention to these nuances and understanding all of the ways by which people expect communication to occur, expect recognition to be given, expect, promotions to be able to be put into place, a leader is not going to be able to successfully pull this group of disparate people together. So we've done quite a bit of work in that space here at Atos in educating our employees on how to communicate across the generations, but also educating our leaders on that same topic and making sure that they are well aware of how to recognize someone in a way that they want to be recognized, and what is the best vehicle to reach all of the generations from a communications perspective, and things along those lines. I'm lucky enough to partner with AARP, which is the American Association of Retired Personnel, and the World Economic Forum on this new project that's about to launch, which is called Living, Earning, and Learning Longer. People are staying in the workplace 10 to 15 years longer than they have in generations previously. And there's many factors that really impact that, such as layoffs, the desire to remain in the workplace and stay relevant. And oftentimes people will come back out of retirement and work part-time as a consultant to the companies that they used to work for. So we have to be able to understand, how to incorporate the talent of those who have been in the workplace for the longest, along with the talent of those who are new to the workplace. Bring them together so that they can work in harmony with one another, do things like the reverse mentoring programs, where it's actually the newest employee who is mentoring the more seasoned personnel on topics related to what they may have just learned in college and so forth. And along those lines, we partner very closely with universities across the globe to be able to facilitate this joining together of the minds at an early stage. One of our most successful programs was held earlier this year prior to the pandemic with National Technical Institute for the Deaf, which is here in the United States in Rochester, New York, as a matter of fact. And our Atos women's groups from across the globe were paired up with women from the university who are studying different tech fields. And we're able to offer them some practical advice on acclimating from the collegiate atmosphere into the corporate world. But we learned so much about how to communicate with the deaf and hard of hearing population more effectively, and how to communicate with those fresh graduates so that they feel welcome, they know that they're valued, and that they are able to make an immediate impact in the workplace. So continuing programs like this is something that every company should really be thinking about. And so they too can see the success of this coming together and this collaborative, inclusive spirit, which really drives innovation, diversity of thought, and employee satisfaction, as well as client satisfaction.
Wow, that is really amazing. It's really nice to see that there are actually so many programs that you're curating and making it kind of really prevalent, because I think the old age organizations they might not probably give this a lot of weight, but I feel like more and more people are coming out from the shadows and they want to be recognized and they're in the spotlight. So this kind of awareness that you talk about through these programs, I think this really will be helpful for creating that harmony that we so need when it comes to generational gaps. You have the millennials, the Gen Z, and so many different kinds of people that are coming together. So thank you so much for that. Um, and I also want to address something that's very, very prevalent now in different kind of cultures of an organization. And when you talk about culture, it's really very instrumental, right, in creating the right kind of mindset for handling these sensitive topics, handling diversity and inclusion problems. So, in your experience, what do you think is missing in this whole learning process where leaders have to, and especially new age leaders that are just coming starting off as on the right path of being a leader, how do they gauge these issues and address them? What kind of qualities do you think are required to handle these issues?
Well, it all comes down to some very simple words that we sometimes, in our hurry to get things done, overlook: respectfulness, inclusivity, and mutual support. So I think leaders really have gotten away from something very simple called active listening. And I'm not saying that in an accusatory manner. I'm guilty of it myself. As soon as someone begins to answer a question you've just asked them, your mind is like racing ahead and coming up with the next level question you're going to ask of that person. So since you're not really listening to him or her or they, you may miss out on something important that is said during that conversation. And as a result, you're giving an answer that is only partially going to address what they were actually talking about. So you have to listen. You have to stay connected to that conversation and not let your mind be, derailed by different thoughts that are going through your head. The average adult pays continuous partial attention, and our attention span has been reduced to about 2 minutes before we really start thinking about something else. So we have to ask the question and then listen to the answer before we respond, so that that mutual respect is, apparent in the way we behave. They begin to trust us more as employees so that we can be seen as that person to go to when they have issues. And when we start asking them questions about how they're doing with their workload, especially now during the pandemic, if we aren't checking in with our people and really being that empathetic listening ear for them, then we are not helping our employees grow and be successful. We have to set the tone that it's okay to seek help if they're overwhelmed. We've got to make sure that we're providing them with the right resources, and we have to keep people abreast of what changes are, in the particular marketplace at that time that may affect how and where and when they do their jobs. And I'm hearkening back to that course that I just mentioned. It's this type of opportunity for leaders to step back and think, I need to be paying better attention in this space that will really make that difference, contributing to that culture of inclusivity and respect and reciprocity and engagement and awareness and all of that. Because if we aren't paying attention and listening to each other, then eventually nobody's listening to anybody.
That is so true. I love that bit about, listening, where we need to kind of actively participate and not just think about, what am I going to say next? Because that is just so easy to do, but it's so hard to listen. And right, like you said, right, empathy is what really makes a leader stand out from others. So I think the course that you've planned out, that's just going to be so helpful, for leaders and for so many other people who are grappling with this, especially since it's so important to be resilient and at the same time be empathetic. So really, thank you so much for that, Denise.
You're
And
welcome.
sure. So finally, on a passing note, I would kind of love to ask you if you have any sound bites for our audience or any takeaways for our viewers.
Pay attention to what's going on as far as, all the latest developments related to the pandemic, so that you can provide that reassuring bank of information to your employees. By keeping abreast of what's going on in the different parts of the world, you will then be able to share that information accordingly with your employees. But don't be that, voice of doom that things are, the sky is falling, like that story from people's childhoods. Always pepper it in with very upbeat information. Share courses that are available. Right now, people are really focusing on making sure they are relevant and that they can prove their relevance. So talk about courses that they could consume. If the workload is a little lighter than normal because of the impact of the virus, get them to focus on their own self-development. I started this program called Talking in Circles in August of this year. And typically when a group of people are talking in circles, they're not listening to each other. They're not collaborating. They're all talking over each other, and they leave the room with nothing having been accomplished. But these talking in circle sessions focus on a single topic, and we break them into groups where they sit virtually, of course, in a circle and talk about what we're discussing for that particular session. We've talked about what it's like to be the only person from a represented group in a group setting. We've talked about, how we can actually communicate more inclusively with one another and be aware of the different factors that would impact a person's ability to feel like they are accepted and belong. And one we just did on Monday of this week was we took a look at a video produced by Mattel. And it was Barbie, the doll, sitting at a table. Of course, this is a cartoon, with one of her friends whose name is Nikki. And Nikki is a person of color. And she was explaining to Barbie about microaggressions she had faced. And Barbie was astounded. So when I put this out there on their calendars, I asked people to watch this video with their children and then come to this session to be able to talk about how their kids reacted to this. And we had a really thoughtful discussion about how these parents then started a conversation about racism, about microaggressions, and about ways by which we can overcome all of that. So these talking in circle sessions allow people the chance to actively listen to each other, to hear a different perspective, and then incorporate that into the way they act and behave moving forward. And they take these home with them. They are talking about these sessions with their families. And it's really kind of evolving our employee base into a much more accepting and awakened group than they were 6 months ago. So that's something I would encourage. Talk to your colleagues, get involved, expand your trusted network, and include people who are not like you, that don't have the exact same thoughts that you do, because they're the ones who will really wake you up to how you should be acting and what you can change to move forward. So those are my main pieces of advice.
Wow, absolutely. I think talking in circles is a great initiative by you. It's really, really, it sounds very interesting. I think it's so important to make people aware.
And it's fun, but it's also really, it's got understanding built into it, because you're increasing the understanding of your audience while they're also enjoying themselves. And people really respond to that edutainment, to being entertained while they're being, taught something too.
Wow, it's really amazing. I love your perspective on this. Thank you so much, Denise. It was really a pleasure having you on our series. It was a great conversation. And I'm sure our audience will pick up really great insights from this conversation too. So thank you so much.
I was glad to be here. Thank you for thinking of me. Have a great rest of your day.